Hi, we're here today as part of PASFA's 50th anniversary celebration. They are doing interviews with people who have been significant in PASFA's history. Many of the past presidents have been interviewed, but today we're going to talk with Scott Miller, who is the Senior Vice President and Director of Federal Relations for PHEAA. I'm Chris Zuzack. I'm a past president from 1994-95, and Scott and I are just going to have a little conversation about his role in financial aid and how he's been there for us for quite some time now. So, Scott, let's just start with how did you get into this crazy business?
That's probably it goes back a long time, so it's appropriate that it's part of history. So in 1976, I was a student at Queens College in the City University of New York, and there were significant budget cuts, and one of the cuts was the financial aid office. So I learned how to be a peer counselor, convincing people not to take out student loans, and help the Student Government Association write a guide to financial aid programs. So that's my absolute introduction to financial aid. And somehow or other it sustained me for a long time.
So what has been your career path over the years from those humble beginnings?
Those humble beginnings. I always had wanted to come to Washington. That was kind of a goal. So after I took my political science degree, and I got a job working on a research study in about federal financial aid. And I actually traveled around the colleges and universities across the country and interviewed financial aid administrators, college presidents, registrars, and we interviewed students and went through financial aid files. And I learned a lot about financial aid packaging and financial aid practices there. I went from there, from that, I was for a consulting firm. I worked for them actually in the D.C. area for a couple of years on the second phase of that study, like running the people who were in the field and writing reports. And then I worked for a congressional commission in 1981 called the National Commission on Student Financial Assistance, which was chartered by Congress to look at a bunch of issues in student financial assistance. Two interesting facts is among the commissioners were Claiborne Pell and Bill Stafford, Bob Stafford, I'm sorry, both senators at the time, so it was like the founding fathers of financial aid programs. And one of my responsibilities was looking at aid administration. And so the master calendar that exists today that says if your federal government writes a regulation, it can't be effective until the next academic year. I actually got to I wrote that part of the statute. That was one of our reports, and I was able to, the legislative language still survives.
Wow. That's pretty exciting.
It's pretty cool, actually, and it still kind of works, which is kind of interesting. From there, I worked for American Council on Education, the National Student Aid Coalition, which helped write the need analysis formulas at the time. And for those of you who have been around a long time, I worked with Frank Keppel back then.
That is going back a few years.
It's all dates myself. And then I got into the wonderful world of student loans and lobbying. Worked for Sallie Mae for 12 years, and then have been working for PHEAA since 1998 as their D.C. lobbyist. And that was my introduction to PASFA.
So why don't you talk a little bit about PASFA and your involvement with our organization?
Well, I always tell the story when I went for my interview with PHEAA. Gary Smith back then made me put on my calendar while I was in the interview the date of the PASFA conference. He said, this is going to be a really important part of your job, and you're going to support PASFA because it's really important to PHEAA, which it was. And I went to my first PASFA conference that October, and was scared to death and did my first federal update. Apparently I did okay. And
they asked you back.
They asked me back, seemingly endlessly, which I'm honored to do. But also, immediately, was a member of the Federal Relations Committee or the Government Relations Committee, and so I can't tell you things that I enjoy more than working with PASFA and helping them navigate the joys of D.C. and understand the policymaking process and how their place fits in it. So that's the bulk of my role, I think, has been doing that. And, it's been, like I said, way more fun than most of what I do.
Well, I was on the Government Relations Committee and had the honor of having you lead us through D.C. and meet with our legislators and explaining the process, and it was very enlightening. And I can see why everyone liked it and why you would like it, too. It was very, very nice.
Yeah, it's kind of those D.C. visits are really a lot of fun because they're fun for me because except for having to schedule them, which is like my personal nightmare.
Yeah.
But I think what repeats year after year is that folks come for their first visit and they're nervous because they don't think they know, like, what am I going to tell these people? And I try to convince them as much as I possibly can that the people they're talking to know nothing about what you're talking about. And it's your opportunity as the expert to talk to them about these issues, tell them about your students, about your schools, about how these programs that these folks are responsible for, authorizing and reauthorizing, what the impact is on the ground. And, I find that, the folks from PASA are such articulate and passionate spokespeople for these programs that it's such a pleasure to go around to these offices with them, and the nerves wear off. Yeah. I think rather quickly after the first couple of visits, but
you help with that too. Your demeanor with the folks and very helpful.
I have two jobs. Well, there's several jobs there, but the two main ones. First was to set up the visits, right? So I try to set them up with as friendly an audience as I can, and people that know something, certainly know me, know PHEAA, understand our relationship to the programs, and I try to prep them a little bit. And the second thing is just to facilitate. Yeah. So just to move it along, and over the years too, to make sure that everybody, if we're sitting around a table with several people, that everybody participates, and that everybody gets a chance to sort of come out of their shell.
Now, one of the things at the PASA conference presentations that everyone comes to because they're so wonderful is how you interweave humor into the session. So maybe it's a baseball theme, maybe it's classic movies, maybe it's rock songs from the 70s, whatever. Where do you get your inspiration for those? Because they're wonderful.
Well, okay, first of all, you're the one that showed up for a spring training with a catcher's mask and a chest protector. So don't,
I was taking your lead.
That is one of the great moments I've ever seen in a presentation. Secondly, anyone who knows me or spends more than 5 minutes with me learns two things, I think, pretty quickly. One is I love to tell stories. I'm a storyteller at heart. And so I get a chance, these presentations give me a chance to tell a story. So what the story is, what's going on in D.C. today that's of relevance to you that I can help explain. I also really like explaining stuff, and try to make what seems unbelievably complex or obscure and try to bring it home, and so you understand and folks understand what the next step is, what had happened, how did we get here, what might happen next, and I love doing that. And the second thing, aside from being a storyteller, is I tell terrible jokes, and I know, but I don't stop, and my daughter will attest to that, and I don't, I'm undeterred. So I put a lot of the onus on the PASA audiences because you guys laugh. And it's not my fault that you laugh at my bad jokes. So you encourage me, so I keep doing it. I thought I was thinking about this, and I thought, it's my rare chance of experience. You hear musicians and all talk about all this time that they feed off the audience. Yeah. This is my little, group. This is my little chance to feed off the audience, and I stand up there and I just love it and have fun with it, and apparently that translates, and I'm thrilled that it does.
They're truly laughing with you and not at you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Both are perfectly permissible.
Well, with all these years in student aid, I wanted to ask you about a legislative aspect about what would you say has been the best piece of financial aid legislation that has been passed, and what is the worst?
There's probably a lot of competition for worst. When I think about the best, And honestly, I was sort of drawn to just think it's the Higher Education Act of 1965 and really the first reauthorization, the Education Amendments of 72. The framework in those bills, the Pell program, called Educational Opportunity Grant Program originally, and then BEOG, the student loan program, the guaranteed loan program, the campus-based aid programs, TRIO, at the beginning, and Gear Up came later. If you take those as kind of the core pieces of student financial aid, those have been around since those pieces of legislation and enhanced in some really interesting ways. We used to have SSIG, that provided some money to states to incent states to give grant money. I think that was very significant and underrated piece of legislation. But the basic framework of student aid programs have been in place for, the last, 50 some odd years. It's amazing to me that nobody has thought they needed to take a blank piece of paper and rewrite it and do it over again. Every reauthorization since has been just an incremental add and subtract, and they, some way to enhance and make the programs better. There are examples of bad legislation, but sometimes the bad legislation is because of the way it's implemented. The cap on subsidized loans, for example. The reason maybe it's so bad is because it happens in budget reconciliation, or an appropriations bill. It's not given a proper public hearing. There isn't a chance for experts to come in and say, if you're going to do this, there's a right way and a wrong way. Those sort of things. Even, a good idea going bad, right? The first attempt at summer Pell, a great idea that was an administrative nightmare. Now, the second bite at the apple seems to be better because they put some proper ropes around it, and the idea should be implemented better. But I think going through regular order, as people like to say it, like a real reauthorization process with hearings and discussion and draft bills for comment, and the process through the committee, the subcommittee, and the committee, and then to the floor with chances for input from the public and real debate, produces much better results than what we have today too much of, which is I need to save some money. Where can I find a few pennies, or I need to do something in a big hurry, and just slap something together.
Now, if we could have a wish list of our one single change to student aid legislation that would most benefit students, that wouldn't require millions and billions of dollars, what would that be? That's really, I don't know what it is. Like, there's no silver bullet, right? I think what has happened too often is we've layered program on top of program and created all these various categories of eligible students. So students who got their first loan. Loans are the biggest example of it. Got their first loan in this year, have these benefits associated with it, and then if you got your first loan in some other year, you got a different set. I think doing away with this concept of new borrowers and just saying whatever we're doing, everybody, it's going to be for everybody. Sometimes, that's viewed as taking benefits away from people, and therefore they're very hesitant to do that. But I think somewhere getting rid of the confusion would be really, helpful for everybody. Bringing sanity back, yes. Yeah, I agree with you. So what would be your message for the next 50 years for PASA and the legislative processes and folks that they have to deal with?
Well,
we won't be there for the 100th anniversary, but, we'll be watching this and see what the predictions you might
I hope
made.
not. We'll be holograms, Chris. It'll be really scary. I think what has happened over the last 21 years I've been involved is that I've seen and I've been a part of watching PASFA's legislative advocacy grow and its ability to make its views known on Capitol Hill, and I think in the State House in Harrisburg as well, known and associated with an organization that's extremely credible, represents its members, but most of all represents the best interests of students. I think that's the legacy that has to continue. I think the more PASFA concentrates on that legacy and ensures that their voices are heard, not just when there's some shout out or some immediate emergency, but that it continues to build those relationships. I mean, there's going to be a challenge in the next few years because the Pennsylvania congressional delegation is undergoing a pretty radical change in terms of we're going to have a lot of new members, and those relationships are going to have to be built again. Committee staffs are going to change. Those relationships have to be built. This has to be continually nurtured, and it's something that PASA has done extremely well under Government Relations Committee leadership. I think of people like Mary Ellen Duffy. I think of Linda Anderson, Alyssa Dobson. The folks that came before as well, but that have done a really good job of nurturing those relationships. And I think they need to continue that. The best stories I hear are when one of those chairs of the GRC gives me a call and says, hey, I just heard from somebody on Capitol Hill, somebody on Senator Casey's staff, somebody on the Education Committee staff. That's when you know that it's working. Yeah. Because they're calling you and they know that you're a trusted resource. And that's what PASFA is and should make sure that people on Capitol Hill and on in the State House in Harrisburg know that they are a trusted, reliable resource.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other closing thoughts here as we...
No, except for me, it's just been a privilege and an honor. And I know like those are great cliche words, but I honestly have appreciated every moment I've worked with PASFA, and it has been a highlight of my 21 years with PHEAA has been my ability to work with PASFA and see the organization grow, and to know that the organization of PASFA is the envy of most other state associations, and PASFA folks should be.
New York would probably argue that point.
That's okay.
we know we're best.
I'm a native New Yorker. I know that feeling. There just doesn't have a real peer out there, and it should be the legacy of PASFA's first 50 years is one should be of absolutely, proud and able to puff your chest out and say, I am proud to have worked with PASFA, and I personally am proud to have been given the opportunity to work with PASFA and everybody who I've ever encountered in the association.
Great.
And with you.
Oh,
Chris, it's been an honor to work with you and your
well.
former career, and then joining PHEAA and being a colleague has been a great for me.
Yes. So thank you, and that's our conversation. Thanks so much.